Speaker Series. And this is the first time we've had a debate as part of the Art Speaker Series, and we're very excited for the debate. We have two people debating and a moderator, all from psychology. Starting with Arleigh Reichl. He obtained his PhD from the University of Iowa, and he has been a Kwantlen faculty member since
early 96.
1996. And we have Wayne Podrouzek, who obtained his PhD at Simon Fraser University and has been
98.
at Kwantlen since 1998. And we have Farhad Dastur as our moderator, and he got his PhD from Dalhousie University, and he's been at Kwantlen since
2000.
2000, okay. And Farhad might be the only member of this trio with actual true debating credibility. He was on the provincial debate team, so he actually knows what he's doing. The rest of us don't. But you're in for a treat. Wayne and Arleigh have very different opinions on today's topic, and you're going to hear those opinions. And just a few items of business to get out of the way. We are videotaping today's debate, and that means that if you ask questions from the audience, your voice will be captured, your face will not. And so hopefully you're comfortable having your voice taped for posterity. Okay, so that is it. I'm going to bring up Farhad Dastur to tell you about the rules, and we have cookies and tea and coffee, and thank you very much for coming out to support the Art Speaker Series. And today's event is going to go for 90 minutes in total, less about 5 minutes for introduction. So hopefully you'll enjoy it as much as I will. Okay, thanks for coming.
Good morning, everyone. Can you all hear me? This is strange. There we go. I just wanted to acknowledge that we are on the indigenous territories of many First Nations, and we give respect for that. Thank you for coming today. It's the beginning of the semester. You're all busy. We have faculty, we have students, we have administrators, staff members. I notice all the students are on the left, physically the left. The faculty and the administrators on the right. I think that's quite interesting. It's probably because that's closer to the coffee, so I won't read too much into that, but I'm a psychologist, so I tend to read into people's behavior. So today's Art Speaker Series debate, political correctness in academia, from PC language in the classroom to the publication of fake grievance papers. As Danny mentioned, my name is Farhad Dastur. I'll be your moderator today. Hello. And I wanted to acknowledge what a debate is. It is a vigorous clash of ideas in an organized fashion, according to some ground rules of engagement, but it is meant to be provocative. It is meant to be emotional. It is meant to be persuasive. And yes, there's room for humor. It embodies critical thinking. It revels in language. It allows for wit. And it elevates rational argumentation. There's a long history of debate in academia and in democratic organizations in the West, and indeed in all kinds of governance structures around the world, when people sit in a circle together and talk about how the tribe should engage in a certain activity. That too is debate. So it is a very human activity. What we have today is something a little bit more formal. We're modifying certain debate rules called the Oxford Union debate rules, where the speakers have a certain amount of time to propose their ideas, and then there's an opportunity for the opposing debater to defend their position or ask questions or rebut. There will be time for you also to ask questions. The idea of debate is that we should fight each other. We should fight the ideas that each other has in a safe setting, in a setting that allows and encourages that type of interaction. To fight in a room as opposed to a battlefield or in the streets. It is better to debate a question, said Joseph Joubert, the French essayist, than it is to settle it. A debate resolution is a controversial statement. It can be supported, or it can be argued against, opposed. Arguing in support of today's resolution is Dr. Wayne Podrouzek, while arguing against the resolution is Dr. Arleigh Reichl. I would say one other thing. Any idiot can argue, but it takes real skill and real commitment to ideas to actually debate. Now, in the spirit of political correctness, and because I'm a psychologist, let me just point out that the term idiot actually has a history. In the early part of the century, psychiatrists defined idiot as someone with an IQ of 0 to 25. So I'm not using that term politically incorrectly. An idiot is just one level below imbecile, which of course is one level below moron with an IQ of 51 to 70. So when you ask your questions, I would ask you not to be idiotic in your questions, but a little bit higher than that.
At least moron.
So I mentioned what the title of the speaker series is, but the resolution today is a lot simpler, it's a lot more clear. And the resolution is simply this, that political correctness is a threat to freedom of speech on campus. And the structure of our debate we will first have an initial vote of what your opinion is on that. Then both debaters have 10 minutes to make their opening remarks. Dr. Podrouzek speaking in favor of the resolution, Dr. Reichl opposing it. This will be followed by a 15-minute intra-panel discussion. That's where the two debaters get to talk to each other and eviscerate each other. And then you, audience, get 20 minutes to do the same to them. Each debater will have 5 minutes of closing remarks in an effort to persuade you to their position. And the audience will be again polled at the end to see if any opinions have shifted. And finally, my homie, Dr. Bernstein, will remind everyone of next month's speaker series.
Okay, what's the resolution?
The resolution is political correctness is a threat to freedom of speech on campus. And with a show of hands, who is in favor of this resolution? Who agrees with this resolution? Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10. Can someone record this for me? I'll put it down here. 10 people for. Feels like class. Who's opposed to it? Show of hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. Opposed?
Sorry, brother.
Who's undecided?
Okay, let you
1,
decide.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Who here has absolutely no idea what I'm talking about? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, and I'm going to ask you a supplementary question. This is not typical, but depending on the arguments you hear today, how many of you think you're willing to change your opinion? So this is a fairly open-minded group. This increases the challenge.
One would hope. This
One
is a
would hope.
university.
One would hope. Okay. So without further ado, I'm going to bring up our first speaker, Dr. Podrouzek. Opening remarks in favor of the resolution, political correctness is a threat to freedom of speech on campus. You, sir, have 10 minutes.
Thank you so much. All right. So I've got my 10 minutes, and I would like to take the first few minutes and sort of burn them by saying how much I really like Arleigh. We see almost nothing eye to eye. I believe in one of our emails he said, we agree on nothing. That's not quite true. We both agree that there should be world peace, just we differ on how to get there. He certainly is one of the most principled, nice, believing people I know. He discusses things well, argues things well. I argue and discuss with him whenever I can. I'm sure sometimes when he sees me coming down the hall, he wishes he could duck into an office and let me pass by. However, having said that, every time I discuss things with him, I come away with a slightly different perspective than when I came in, which I think is a good thing. Now, we are in danger of losing him to Chicago. Their gain, our loss. Often in our department, he is the only dissenting voice, and he has the gumption to stand for that voice. Because of him, I've altered my positions on things like Venezuela, I now regularly watch Democracy Now!, which I never did before. I still don't disagree with everything they say, even half. After interacting with them, like I say, I always come away with a different perspective, a more nuanced understanding. Having said that, I simply think that he's wrong in his stance regarding political correctness and free speech on university campuses, both here and worldwide. Now, for some of you who've been educated in the school system since 1980, trying to change your mind would be like trying to convince, oh, sorry, do I need to get
closer to the mic? Yeah.
Okay, you can ask me directly.
Okay.
Somebody moved it. Sorry, is that better?
Thank you.
Okay, assalamu alaikum. So for some of you, it's going to be very difficult to change your minds, having been indoctrinated into PC culture. But I'm not trying to do that. What I'm trying to do is sow the smallest seed of doubt that political correctness might not be the best way to engage in having a university atmosphere. Okay. So again, not trying to be counterproductive in terms of the discussion, but I think political correctness is counterproductive in terms of society, educating students, graduating students with epistemic fluency, and developing critical thinkers. So in what world would any students or faculty be precluded from fulsome discussion and expression of opinion on any issue, and that's any opinion on any issue? In what world should any dogma not be open to critical analysis? Well, in the political correctness world, often is the case, right? So that's not social justice in a university, that is indoctrination. And it's indoctrination in the Chinese education sense, okay? Using various cognitive methods, including cognitive dissonance, where you have to agree to something you disagree with because of political pressure or whatever. And then that way you get to change your mind and become more sort of on that side. And these are brainwashing techniques. Now, one might argue that political correctness actually enhances freedom of speech or free expression on campuses by permitting those who have been marginalized and oppressed a voice. But it does so at the expense of others, and I would argue at their own expense, right? If there is free speech, it is for all and not for some. Having said that about people who were marginalized, oppressed, whatever it happened to be, in what world should we do anything to decrease discussion among people with different positions and different worldviews, right? Driving people into different identity silos who come to fear one another because we don't understand one another. And also, in what world would we shield people from views that they find discomforting, right? If we're going to make them stronger and more resilient, better able to cope and counter arguments, then they need to be exposed to these various positions. Every medical and psychological technique of which I'm aware to help people who have issues involves exposing them to those issues, not shielding them from those issues. Now, on many campuses, there are secret progressive tribunals, committees, if you'd like, of unpolitical correct speech activities, to which one can be anonymously reported for offensive utterances and arguments, that sit in judgment in secret, that can summon without even disclosing the allegations against one, which can cost one one's livelihood. This is realpolitik, social control, and suppression of free speech and open debate, and thus thought. Kind of like the McCarthy House of Un-American Activities trials. Did they have an impact on free speech? I suggest they did, right? We have these here at Kwantlen, and they exist at almost every university. And I submit to you that that, of course, is going to put a call on free speech. Now, in almost every class, I ask, I've got several students here, they can attest to it or not. I ask people how many folks would not say something they find it politically incorrect to say. And in almost all of my classes, somewhere between 1/4 and 3/4 of the class says, I would not say something for fear of some kind of admonition, reprisal, or whatever it happens to be, right? So that's a lot of folks. Sometimes it's like, you might consider it a plurality, if not a majority. Also, a few years ago, we had a student club here denied certification because it was pro-life. There was a little bit of pushback against that. Then it was certified, but not funded. I actually wrote a piece, op-ed piece to the Kwantlen newspaper, which for some reason wasn't published. I don't understand that. Okay? So I asked, does that impact free speech and open debate on campus? And again, I submit to you that it does. Then there are the deplatforming instances. Now, not here so much, because we don't have huge names come here. But people like Paglia, Coulter, Lindsay Shepard, Milo, Shapiro, Peterson, Jermaine Greer, Flamenco, and several of these were second-wave feminists who actually moved feminism forward, who are now being deplatformed for not being feminist enough, right? Not a good thing, in my opinion. Does it, again, impact free speech on campuses? I suggest it does. I submit to you that it does. Further, and this isn't necessarily directly political correctness, but where 90% of faculty seem to be identified as liberal progressives. Very few people are identified as conservatives. Progressive faculty, there's research out there that identify that people, they actually discriminate against people with more conservative views being hired on, right? And again, that is political correctness. Does that influence free speech on campus? I submit to you again that it does. Remember, remember that free and open discussion is not necessarily for the speaker. It is for the listener. What small group of happy experts have ridden on Parmenides' chariot should decide what is acceptable for you to be exposed to, who do not trust you to determine what ideas you might wrestle with and not. These folks who know better, right, who know they know better, take it upon themselves as their obligation, their duty, their prerogative, and perhaps their pleasure to tell the rest of us what to think. John Stuart Mill noted, he who knows only his side of the argument knows little of that. You need to be exposed fully to the people who have that position in a free and open debate, not as represented by somebody else countering their position. And Thomas Paine, by the way, John Stuart Mill and Thomas Paine are two of my heroes, noted that my mind is the crucible of right and wrong, and what I consider is not to be determined by others. Which time is it? Oh, a minute and a half. The infantilization of our students in thinking that they, like the average 10-year-old, needs to be protected from things, ideas that might be damaging or they might not find palatable, I think, is unfortunate. We're all thinking adults who need to be exposed to all sorts of ideas, pleasing or not, and that is the best road to an educated, critical thinking public. Thank you so much. I'm glad you have something to drink because I should have packed vodka.
How's that for volume?
Good.
All right? In the back? More? Louder? Is that good? Or something like that? All right. All right. Well, thanks very much for showing up. I really appreciate the interest in this. And I have to thank Wayne for his, opening comments there and disarming me with that. Sorry about that, but it's always engaging. It's always fun.
No.
So, I actually want to get to a point where we have an alternative to this debate over political correctness, good or bad. I don't think that's a productive debate. So I'm going to, get to an alternative that I think will help us be more productive in that. But I think we need to start by debunking this myth that there was somehow a golden era of free speech on university campuses that only came under attack when, special interest, marginalized voices, social justice warriors started to impose limitations on people's speech. And you hear Wayne talking about, censorship, tribunals. I'm not quite sure. We'll find out more about those tribunals, about no platforming policies. You don't need any of those. You don't need any of those to silence voices. And if you look at, for example, the LGBTQ community and their voices silenced for decades, you don't need no platforming speech policies when you have an entire society where discrimination is legal. You can legally discriminate against this group, where they are invisible in the media. You don't see any role models. You don't see anyone from the LGBTQ communities. And Wayne and I are old enough, we remember this, right? It's not that long ago. You don't need these policies to inhibit free speech and shut down voices when you're more likely to hear about someone from that community or one of those communities being beaten up or murdered than you are to hear about their accomplishments. When the people who have, who are successful and who are in positions of celebrity or success or high profile are afraid to come out and acknowledge that they belong to these communities. When they are regularly targeted in workplaces, in schools, with just derogatory jokes and labels and comments. You don't need these are child's play, these policies of no platforming, when you compare that to the weight of a society that is shutting down these voices, right? I would like to know, Wayne, how many times, and you and I remember, when we had students sitting in class and they were not coming out to us, and we didn't know who they were, and they certainly weren't speaking out for their rights or their voices. How often back then did you express public outrage that voices were being silenced, that we were not hearing those voices? I'm willing to wager that most of us didn't even think about it. Did it occur to you that they were in our classes, right? And if it did it even occur to us that they had something different to say? So that golden era of free speech was wonderful if you were in power, if you were a white male, and you were free to say anything within a narrow range. So narrow, we didn't even recognize that there was anything outside of that, right? Where were the voices from, maybe this is a little before your time, Wayne, but where were the voices from you and your intellectual predecessors expressing outrage over the lack of women in university, the lack of women in STEM areas? Where were those voices where were those voices calling out for free speech and for inclusion in those situations, right? These were moments of voices that were not even on the radar for people. Where are the voices now that are advocating for or that are concerned about the complete absence of voices of people living in poverty in the university environment? Where are those voices now? I look at these websites, there's Aereo is one, thanks to Roger Tweed for putting me onto this, website that is devoted to free speech on campuses, supposedly with people from across the spectrum, and they identify things like free speech policies, they identify things like no platforming, that's where you deny controversial speakers the opportunity to come in and speak, harassment by student activist groups, things like that, right? And they identify those things. Why don't they identify these systemic, cultural, societal factors that are completely shutting out certain types of voices from the university environment, right? So that's, so I think we need to start by, again, dismissing this notion that somehow free speech was wonderful, these were the good old days, everyone had free speech, and then along came these social justice warriors to take that away from us. So I think we need to get rid of that notion. Now, I'm not here to say that because they did it, because those voices were excluded, now we should be excluding other voices. That's not my point. I do think that there are legitimate, anytime we impose restrictions, they should be done in a thoughtful way. But imagine, this website that, is out there identifying these different, what they identify as threats to free speech. How much more credible that would be, how much more productive that would be if it was inclusive and it acknowledged these societal influences that limit voices on campus. So I think that's the first starting point. The other one, how long do I have? I have time?
3 minutes.
What's that?
3 minutes.
Oh, okay. All right. And so that, the other thing that I would point out following that is that I think we have come to a point where everything becomes about free speech, right? And I think Wayne would agree with me, and it's interesting that he talks about, we both talk about critical thinking and that. It's funny that we have these very different views about what prevents critical thinking. But, I think the other point I would make is that we emphasize free speech, and everything becomes about free speech, and we sometimes overlook other things that we value in university, like scholarly rigor, like evidence, like sound reasoning. If you were teaching a course on nursing, and you had a student who brought up these you're talking about vaccination, and you had a student who brought up these anti-vaxxer views, these anti-vaccination views, right? And they're often very scientific in their arguments. Absolutely, I think that instructors should address those and should address those, right? We shouldn't shut out that voice. But if that student keeps bringing those up, I think we would expect that instructor to say, look, we're not going to continue to address those in class, right? You can talk to me after class, you can send me something. And I think the students in the class would benefit and appreciate that. Is that a threat to free speech? Are we denying, is that a free speech issue? Are we denying that person their right to free speech because we limit how much they can bring that up? How is that different from someone who keeps bringing up anti-immigrant views on the basis that immigrants bring crime and they threaten our values? How is that different if we bring up these views that are based on no evidence? There's no evidence to support those things. How is that different from saying, look, we're not going to keep talking about these, transphobic views that are based on assumptions, incorrect assumptions that trans rights are harmful to youth, right? There's no evidence of that. Why should we it's not about free speech, it is about upholding the standards of scientific rigor, right? Or arguments that women shouldn't be in science and technology because they're just genetically inferior. People will say that, well, we're inhibiting those views because we're shutting down free speech. But the point I'm making is it's not always just about free speech, right? We need to also look at this evidence and the reasoning behind those kinds of views. And if it isn't there, I think instructors, other students have a right to say, okay, we're not going to continue to be discussing those kinds of views. So I think, am I about
30 seconds.
30 seconds. Well, that's probably about what else I could squeeze in. So I do want to say, I have a solution for us, and I don't want to just be, PC, good or bad. So I have a solution for us that will come in our next stage, I guess, at some point. Right?
Yeah, that's better.
Tight quarters for me. I don't know, guys.
Keep your arm length away.
That was intentional.
That's so that you can squish into
We can show that.
pictures.
You want? Okay, that's fine.
I've got my own.
So, very powerful opening from two of our speakers. The reason I wanted one mic was so they couldn't interrupt each other. That could get interesting too. So, this is the opportunity for each debater to take apart the other debaters' points, conclusions, and maybe even to make a few new points as well. So, who would like to start?
I'll start. So I don't disagree with a great deal of what you said. I think a lot of it was pretty much non sequitur in terms of dealing with is free speech a threat on university campuses. I don't think it's kind of a small thing when someone can make a statement or express an opinion, as well argued as it might be, and have their job taken away from them by a secret panel and tribunal. And you know, people look and say, does that exist? I will ask. We've got administrators here. You were administrator. Run into it? Where's Wade? Does it exist? Do we have tribunals at this school where you can be summoned before them, not be told what the allegations against you are, having been reported? No, seriously.
Maybe it means that.
Oh, you know what? No, you know what we'll do? Someone go over to the union office, because the union actually has a letter of understanding with administration that the union will not interpose if someone's summoned in front of one of these committees without having been told the allegations. That's easy enough to just demonstrate.
I'll tell you that I just experienced that myself. I was summoned. I was never told what the allegations were. They refused to tell me what the allegations were. Yeah, it does exist upon them.
Whoops.
So these are not inconsequential matters. Now, if someone were to, a few years ago, speak up at a university, you talk about oppressed voices, say, I think gay should be good, they'd be gone by the same processes here. Because it was done to people then, in no way indicates that those same kinds of things should be happening today. If you're going to protect people, but protect people globally, not in terms of identities. And
So, well, you know, I mean, I would agree with that we need to protect against that kind of
we've
thing.
agreed,
I mean,
20
I
years.
don't know what, what was your last point there? So,
We agreed.
sorry. So, I mean, I don't know, you know, here down in Anne's experience, I don't know about this. You told me that the Human Rights Tribunal in BC is secretive, has 100%.
No. That was Section 13 of the Hate Speech Act federally. 25 years, hundreds of cases, not one single not guilty. And I have the McLean's article on my iPad, if anybody cares to get the data for it, when it was finally disbanded, which, by the way, Trudeau II is looking to bring back. So I've got the data.
Wait.
So,
Yes. Oh,
I've got the data.
sorry.
all right. So, well, you know, if you're making that case that, you know, there are these interest groups have taken power and are controlling the universities and controlling even other, you know, is that sort of your contention that these?
That there is a Weltanschauung that definitely has an overlay on what it is that we experience.
There is a Weltanschauung.
Sorry about that. That definitely has an overlay of what we experience at the universities. That definitely does dampen down free speech. And it's not the free speech, it's the free and open discussion, the interchange of ideas. It's the breadth of analysis and things like that. It's having that kind of epistemic fluency. That's what's important. Right? That's what's important. It's not that one group gets to do certain things and another group doesn't get to do certain things. Like, I think we need, speaking as a white male with colored fingernails, okay? I think we need to get out of this identity politics crap. And some people can do stuff, some people can't, which is exactly what you talked about there, where at one time there were certain groups that could do things, everyone else was shut down. No. Don't think it can be like that. I think we either open it up or we go back to something. It's just that different people are disadvantaged. Makes no sense to me. And you say, where was I? March with the blacks in the 60s, march with the women in the 60s. Women in STEM, pretty much they get to decide that today, where they're looking for them, right? They're looking for them. If you go into those, you're hired in a 3-to-1 rate, right? There's all kinds of data out there. People decide not to do it. In the countries where there's most sexual freedom, if you like, whatever you want to call it, women are moving away from those areas to areas that they find more comfortable. And so that was exactly against the hypothesis that when these countries or societies become more egalitarian, more women would move into those areas. It hasn't happened. So, I mean, people get to make choices. How many people have read Alexander Solzhenitsyn? Okay, so we have a few people at least that have read. I believe the quote goes, no, well, this is from the Gulag. I mean, I've read Gulag, First Circle, First Circle, Cancer Ward, Life in the Day in the Life of. So I did my 70s crap reading Solzhenitsyn. He said, "We are not born the same. If we are free, then everyone's not equal. If we are equal, then everyone's not free." And I totally agree with that.
All right, well, I think we don't entirely disagree on these things. I mean, I see we're in sort of a dialectic here where,
That's good.
we see forces pushing back and forth, and, I think we're working towards something that is better to come out of this. So I won't argue that there aren't oversteps, that there aren't, that there aren't some cases where free speech may be inhibited, things like that, on both sides. I won't argue that. But I do want to, so one thing I want to propose is that this notion of political correctness, it's a pejorative term, it's a dismissive term, and that it really only serves to polarize people, right? So there's some interesting research in the US by Dan Kahan, who does stuff on political thinking, and he looks at climate change. And what his research shows is that people's position on climate change is much more about social identity than it is about facts or information. That people identify with one side or another, one group or another. And when new issues come along that are related to climate change, they go with their group. And this is regardless of how much scientific literacy they have or scientific information they have, they go with their group. And so these new issues just serve to polarize people. And I think that's where we are with the political correctness debate, is that as soon as an issue comes up, right, if it's from the social justice side, Wayne and people like him are opposed to it. If it's from, if it's pushing back from the PC bad side, then, anyone on the sort of social justice side has to line up against that. The thing is, his research shows some interesting hope in that he also does research in areas of the US like Miami, where they are living with climate change. And they actually get things done. And they get things done by not bringing up climate change, right? By not forcing people into their camps. So what they do is they have meetings and they talk about, what do we do about this road that keeps flooding, right? What do we do about these residents that keeps flooding every year? Or how do we better protect against severe storms? And they don't force people into a camp, right? So they allow for discussion of issues without this polarization, without forcing people into their tribe, their group, their camp. So I think there's hope for us. That's a lesson for us in terms of debates about political correctness. So I think one of the things that I think is important is that we use evidence as a way of making decisions about specific issues. So if you think about something like the generic he, right? In English language, traditionally, we would say, when a student attends university, he learns many new things. And the assumption was, everyone knows we're talking about men and women. It's all, that was the language. Everyone knows it's referring to everyone. We have evidence, several studies that show that that is not the case, right? It just is not. People don't think he or she. They don't think. Women don't think this includes me. Based on that evidence, we have regulations. You look at the APA manual, and the APA manual, our guide to writing, has guidelines for reducing bias in language based on that evidence. To me, that is a no-brainer, that we take an issue like that, and we look at it, and we look at the evidence around that issue, and we make a determination, right? So that's, if we had said, here are the forces of political correctness that want to do this, and there were people who argue, it's too awkward to say he or she, whatever, you can't change language, the reactionary voices, And we did it, and it worked, and people get used to it, and again, it's based on evidence. Now, I will say that has to work on both sides. So I think when we look at evidence, if we look at evidence around no platforming, right? The idea that controversial speakers should be denied access to speak on campus. They should, prevented from speaking on campus. And Wayne mentioned a few of them. The evidence there, and I totally understand groups that want to keep out hurtful voices, voices that are discriminatory, things like that. I totally get that. The evidence suggests that it doesn't have that, it doesn't serve that purpose. So there's good evidence that when people find out something is censored, they're actually more favorable toward it. So for people who don't know much about it, they find out this position is censored, they're actually more favorable toward it. The other thing we find is that when people are told you can't say or think something, they want to do it even more, right? It is the boomerang effect, what we call psychological reactance, which is basically, you're not the boss of me. Now, I know that pretty much any one of my colleagues, and probably any administrator here can tell you that as soon as the higher-ups try to tell the psychology department what to do, you can be absolutely certain Wayne opposes it, right? And then he'll come up with reasons to oppose it, but he will absolutely oppose it. So I think we need to be more thoughtful and careful about it. Doesn't mean we just accept these ideas. And an example that stands out for me is Don Cherry being fired. I know it's not in academia, but here, Don Cherry calls out, immigrants for not buying poppies and supporting that. Like it or not, we know that there are a lot of Canadians who agree with him, right? And when he suddenly is gone, right, we know that one of the reasons they agree with him is one of the most important determinants of anti-immigrant views is the idea that they threaten our values, that they threaten cultural values. So here someone stands up and says they're not supporting our values, and he's out. And he's out, and it just fuels their belief that not only are immigrants not supporting our values, but you can't call them out even on that, because you have to be afraid of offending people. That's just reinforces their beliefs. Instead of, right, giving our reasons. Why is he wrong? First, is there any evidence to support that? And by the way, when he's talking about immigrants, new arrivals, he's talking about people of color, right? He doesn't know who's new or not. He just is saying people of color, right? So is there any evidence that they are less supportive of Canadian values or of buying poppies? Is his reasoning sound? His reasoning is ridiculous, right? If anyone should be called out for taking our rights and freedoms for granted, shouldn't it be the people who spent their whole lives here who aren't buying poppies, not the ones who've been here for 10 years? So I think we need to use evidence to make decisions on these individual issues and not the debate about political correctness or not political correctness. I'll just point out that I think there are smarter ways of trying to change those views. Sorry, what was I going to say? So yeah, I would hope that we could take this out, because again, I know that anytime it looks like it's coming from the social justice group, Wayne will be opposed to it, right? Just, on principle, we'll be dismissing that. And it doesn't, and I think we'll be much more productive if we take an approach where we look at individual issues and we look at evidence around those. And some don't need evidence. So if you think about, terms, labels that are applied to groups, like Indian, that come from a place of discrimination, that come from outside of that group, it should be a no-brainer that we change the language we use, that those requests, those demands to have the language changed should be reasonable ones. I don't know, would you disagree with me on any of that, Wayne? Or?
He can't disagree because we're at the end of the.
Oh, sorry, I used up all the time.
30 seconds.
Okay. I will actually not sort of take the castigation that if it comes from progressives or whatever, then I'll automatically be against it. Left or right, if it interferes with people's freedom, their ability to search out things, to become educated, get fluency, sort of epistemic fluency, things like that, then I'm against it.
But
I'm
you're
not
only calling out the ones on one
Oh,
side.
no. That's because you're with me here, and here it's mostly on that other side. No, I don't mean here today, I mean at this university, right? 90% of everybody here is, I'm left or progressive. I'm left, good God. I consider myself Enlightenment, classic, mill, Paynian left, okay? So, that's because you see me here. You don't see me in other places where I do have people who are more right, and we get discussions like this, but it's on the right side, not on the left
Would
side.
you have more credibility here if you took both sides? If you acknowledge some of those,
Acknowledge what?
some of the positions that you take that would be seen as politically correct.
Like what?
That's my whole point. You're
No. Like you say, like there are a zillion positions that are politically correct positions, right? And for example, am I for not castrating trans people? Absolutely, politically correct. Yeah, why not? Am I for gays have equal rights for it? Yeah, absolutely, politically correct. Why would I not be for those things? Okay. However, there are other things when they do impinge on other folks those are the things I'm against. I'm against the self-righteous. No, it is. It's that whole self-righteous. We know what is best. You don't. And the whole thing about there are a lot of things. I can't even start because my 30 seconds I'm sure are well over.
And I don't know if the two of you are going to stick around after this debate. I'm sure a lot of people would have
I can't brief you
questions.
until I got a class.
But this is the part where we really want the audience to step in with their views, their experiences at Qualman, and their questions for either debater. So we have a question back there, and I think we should probably get you a mic. So
Here.
yeah, one of these.
Thank you. I also want to apologize. I just had a little surgery, so it's hard to talk. But thank you very much for your debate. Full disclosure, I grew up in East Germany, so I'm an immigrant. And when you were asking for Solzhenitsyn, yes, I read him, but not as long as the war was up, because we were never allowed to read it. We would have ended up in the kind of gulag.
Different kind of political correctness.
Yeah. So, what I always hear from your side of the debate is that we shouldn't bring up ideas that are hurtful, that are questioning people's identity and all this kind of stuff. The problem with that is if you don't allow those kind of ideas to be discussed openly, they don't just go away. There's actually excellent evidence that if you never talk about it, if you never talk about problems that we still have as a society, then it gets worse, it doesn't get better. Because as you say, people will only stay in their groups. And what has happened in so many places in Canada is that you don't dare any longer to actually say what you want to say. There's an enormous amount of self-censorship out there. And it really doesn't help when the underlying assumption always is that if you are in favor of free speech, you are necessarily against immigrants, or you're necessarily against the LGBT community and so on. That is simply not true. A lot of us who are trying to defend freedom of speech don't believe there was this wonderful, wonderful area of free speech. We all are aware that it was. But we are afraid that the course that we are staking right now is getting us back to the time that I lived through for 26 years in East Germany.
Dankeschön.
Respond to that? I mean, I would just say, I think, we need to look at, when we talk about, shutting out speech or hurtful speech or some positions, I would come back to, first of all, are these positions opinions that have no basis in information. And I think we do need to be patient with people. I understand check your privilege, just shutting it down. I understand the desire to do that, and people who have been marginalized having to repeatedly explain, why their position is valid and things like that. I get that, but I think we do need to recognize and be somewhat patient and take that time. It's a learning process. People don't change overnight. So I'm reluctant. On the other hand, again, I would say, opinions that have no basis in evidence, right? How often do we have to hear those in a classroom, right? That discriminatory views that have no basis in evidence, that have no sound reasoning. I think it's legitimate to call those out, right? So I am, but again, in terms of evidence, should we prevent certain things from being discussed, safe spaces? I think we need some evidence on this. I think we need some evidence on, if people say this threatens me, I'm harmed by this. I don't know. I'm not. Wayne says a lot of psychological therapies, things like that, are based on the notion that we are exposed to things, and I'm not totally sure. I think that we also need to arm people with ways of dealing with those comments, right, so that they can leave feeling like they have been empowered in their response to those comments. It's a tricky issue, right? Yeah.
So, analogy. I used to fight. You don't train to not fight. You fight the way you train. So if you're not exposed to these things, if you don't have the arguments and that kind of thing, how do you find yourself prepared when you're actually in that arena in real life? And I suggest you don't. That's why I think in terms of like educating our students, getting them so they're prepared for the real world. What is it? It's said, hang on, let me see if I got this. Said scale, non scale said vitae decimus. Not for school, but life we study. Okay, we don't study for being here, we study for being up there. If we don't prepare our students for when they exit here, when they don't have the safe spaces where they can take care of themselves, I think that does them a disservice. And I think this is the place that they should get that training, not when they're unprepared out there and they get sidewinded. And sorry, just one more quick thing. I have a saying at home on my wall. If you don't have free speech, how do you know who the assholes are?
Okay, other audience members?
Arleigh, I agree with you that people should be called upon to provide evidence when they make an assertion. I mean, we do that as scholars, right? Students write a paper, make an assertion, present and provide the evidence. No question about that. A couple of things during your presentation. I wasn't comfortable when you said, Wayne, and people like you. I wasn't comfortable when you waved at Wayne and said reactionary. I wasn't comfortable another time as well. We don't need the ad hominem in these kinds of discussions.
Sorry about that, Wayne.
But more what I want to say is before we came in here, I was in the washroom, and in the stall was an anti-turf swerve. Do you know what that is?
I have no clue.
There is an ongoing debate between the LGBTQ community and women because the rights of the LGBTQ community are seen by some to infringe upon women's rights. We've had the platforming of Megan Murphy, who's not allowed to speak. We've had the Pride Parade, ban UBC, ban the Argo, I think, or a couple of other SFU, because they let Megan Murphy speak. I'm on Twitter. I really object to this deplatforming, and I would really like women's voices not to once again be oppressed. This is the story of us in history. As soon as we speak up, men slam us down again. But I don't. I barely say anything. I might question what you mean by hate, etc. But I would never express my point of view because I will get piled on. When I asked a question about how someone differentiated between sex and gender, I got people blocking me. There is certainly a lot of attempts to devoice people, and I'm particularly sensitive to it too right now because it's impacting women in a huge way, and everybody's so concerned with one particular group that they're not willing to hear the effects it will have on another group.
Do you want to comment about it? Okay. Excellent points. Participant back there.
Sorry, I'll point at you next time.
Hi, so I'm at your side, but I have two things that I'm worried about I wanted to ask you. So one thing is that I'm worried about is kind of like taking this whole discussion into, or this whole phenomena into identity politics, instead of to structural analysis. So then instead of kind of like analyzing powers and hierarchies and institutions, it comes into everybody sealed into their own identity boxes. And I think this becomes very problematic, and it also in some ways a sign of privilege. So I would see it much more in my classes at UBC than I see in my classes at KPU, where actually the students come, many of them from much more marginalized groups. So this is one concern. And the second thing that you talked about, how we need to follow academic rigor. And I think this is a problem on both sides. So like this previous example, I think there are some topics now that became very problematic to discuss, like genetic differences, like, I don't know, any kind of like deep analysis that used to be a common sense for many sciences, that there are some kind of like genetic differences. Now, does this justify different treatment or different opportunities? Definitely not. But this is a discussion about how society should run. But it's not about whether there are any kind of differences, genetic differences or whatever, biological differences. So I think there is also a problem in science when it can be used in a bad way on both sides. So those are my kind of like my two things that I would like you to reply.
Yeah, I think we're seeing it. Yeah, of course. I think we see on both sides, right? It's an emotional topic. People line up. It's very much about identity. It's very much about personal issues, right? So, of course, I think we see on both sides those kinds of things. I still think, so the example of genetic differences, my own view, we have a much more sophisticated understanding of genetics, nature-nurture interaction, and the way they influence each other. So I think some of that attempts to identify, I know that's not your main point, but some of that being defended as genetic differences is I think oversimplified in terms of the role of genetics, right? So, but yes, I think I won't disagree that some of that has become problematic on both sides. And again, I think we really need to try to, isolate specific issues. I don't have the answer to that, but you're right.
Okay, the next question is coming from Amir Mikfahari, who's a sociology professor. But I want to hear from students. Yeah. So let him ask the question, and then we're going to go to students.
Brad, there's one there.
Okay. We'll go to the student first.
Student hands.
Who was it?
Yeah.
He's been trying and trying. Sorry.
I kind of wanted to point out the women in STEM comment. Granted, the hiring rates for women in STEM fields and careers may be going up, but the reason why women aren't choosing STEM or aren't going into STEM, I don't think it's completely accurate to say it's just because they're more comfortable in other roles. I think there's a lot of other forms of discrimination that are practiced in workplaces or even in institutions where It's not just about whether or not they're hired, it's about how they're treated once they are hired and how much support they get if they're discriminated against. And a lot of times, because, you know, sometimes it's not outright, you can or cannot do this, sometimes it's more of a backhanded comment or a joke, or just the small things that make people feel uncomfortable, unsafe, and unwelcome. So I think there's a lot more to it than just whether or not someone's hired. I think there's definitely still a lot of societal pressure and expectations that women would not do well in STEM, or women would not make it in STEM, or that is not their place. Although I do think both of you made very good points on several places, and I'm somewhere in between. But another thing is, I think, yes, it's good to prepare for the real world, and maybe this is a little bit idealistic of me, but what if we weren't just trying to prepare for the worst in the world, but also trying to better the world around us? And in a university, granted, some people may be more sensitive, but we're all adults. We can try and prepare ourselves and experience the real world. We're not 5 or 10-year-olds that need to be protected. I think we should be expected to be able to learn how to handle ourselves when we're confronted with things that make us uncomfortable or that we're not really thinking about in the real world.
Don't disagree with it at all.
Yeah.
Can I just, one second?
Thank you. Excellent points about STEM and
Yeah.
about
Just to go back to the STEM thing, in the countries where there is the least, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, of those kinds of pressures and that sort of thing, at least as far as we know, the rates have gone the other way. So that sort of speaks against that hypothesis. Not saying it, because it's always like, well, you can't tell for sure because we haven't eliminated anything. And we haven't, absolutely, right? But the hypothesis should have suggested there'd be more drifting in that direction, the more egalitarian overall the society is. It's gone the other way. That's against that hypothesis. With any luck, it'll all fix up eventually.
Well, hello.
Hello.
It's really weird because I like to think I bring a unique perspective of the situation, being assigned male at birth and going through a large chunk of my life being presented as male and people treating me as male, and then for the last good few years, I've definitely passed as female and people treat me like that. And one of the things I noticed, especially with STEM-related courses, is there is a difference, at least from my personal experience, of how men and women are treated. Before I started passing as a girl, I would never get talked over. People would always stop and listen to me, but I have found that since then, on several occasions, I try and get something in to say, people just keep talking over me. And it's not like they're like horrible people who like want to silence me. It's they're just unaware that that's happening. And in a sense, well, I still presented as male. I probably did the exact same thing too. And yeah, it's just that personal experience. Wanted to go in.
I don't know.
That's an excellent
I've never
point.
been both.
One of the things I would add, that's an excellent point. One of the things I want to throw in is that there is research, good research, showing that when people have power, they're less likely to take the perspective of other people. And this is not just correlational. You randomly assign some people have power and some people have less power. And the people with power will be less likely to take the perspective of others. So I know, Wayne, I keep telling you, we don't agree on it, we disagree on everything. And once you told me, I don't know if you remember this, you told me we agree on something, that you should be nice to other people, right?
Sure.
But I'm going to call you out here, because I've heard you come in and say to a female employee of Kwantlen, "Good morning, beautiful."
Yeah.
And I think you totally thought you're being nice, right? But you don't consider that that person may react to it differently than you intend.
Okay.
So it would be wonderful if we don't need to have regulations, policies, if people just took it on themselves to be more respectful and considerate of others. But they don't. If they have power, they don't. So we have, students may not know this, we as faculty are required to complete a respectful workplace online tutorial. Do we need that? Well, maybe, right?
Got 100%.
What's that?
I got 100%.
Good. So my point, though, is that sometimes we do need, like with the language, like with the language, the generic he, like with promoting respect, things like that. Sometimes we do need pushes. We do need, hopefully not laws and things like that. They often aren't the most effective way, but sometimes we do need some guidelines, some policies to keep limits on things, right? I don't know if you would agree with that. Is that always a threat to free speech? APA telling you can't write just he, is that a threat to free speech?
That's a little bit different. Those are professional guidelines. However, I think that one can have a personal relationship. Sorry.
That one can have a personal relationship as well as a professional relationship with somebody. And I think there's a bleed over there, right? And so
But you
I assume,
decide that.
hold on, I assume that when I'm dealing with adults, if something makes somebody uncomfortable, they'll say it's uncomfortable. People do things to me, I say, yeah, it's pretty uncomfortable. I don't like
We're
that.
getting into the ad hominem again, and I think this is unfortunate.
What's that?
Attacking Wayne personally.
This is something he did. I'm calling him out on something he did.
You're calling him out, you're using a personal attack.
Okay, moderator, I'm going to step in here. We are near the end of this part of the debate.
He did this
Arleigh?
in public.
It's okay. We'll move on. We have time for one more question, and I'm giving that space to a student.
Thank you.
Hello.
Well, I just want to say that I sympathize with Dr. Wayne's proposition, but I do, when I hear Dr. Reichl talking about the scientific rigor, I sympathize with that as well, because last day I was on YouTube and I saw this Discovery Institute thing, and apparently in the States they are using free speech to bring up creationism in biology classrooms, and it's a really prominent thing in the States that I haven't noticed in Canada, but apparently that's a thing. And also, for the women in STEM thing that I want to say a little bit about it, because I didn't notice anything about the STEM, but I read an article the last day on internet. It's a woman who's in law school, and she mentioned that she wasn't comfortable because it's all men around her, and people don't know how to treat her. And so that might be kind of the reason, because there are already a lot of men in STEM fields, so that might be pushing the women out as well because they don't feel comfortable. So yeah, that's all I'm going to say.
Great point about creationism as a using free speech as an argument to bring in something like creationism. That's a good point. Yeah, thanks.
Are you going to give the sociologist gentleman a...
No.
Okay.
Sorry to the sociologist.
Sorry,
But as
I would have liked
I
to
did
hear-
want the last question to go to a student, and both speakers have agreed to stay at the end of the debate for a few extra minutes to continue the conversation. We do need to keep time, and that's why we have a moderator. So both debaters now have 5 minutes to make their closing comments. You can weave in answers to questions or rebut or however you want to handle this. And the idea here is to persuade the audience to shift their opinion or to stick with the one that they had when they first came in. And if you could do that, maybe up with at the podium.
What's that?
To give your closing remarks. Who wants to go first?
Oh, no, I went first last time.
Okay.
Your turn, brother.
Yes.
It's up here.
Are you comfortable here?
Yeah, this is good. I'm settled in here. So again, I'm going to come back to this notion that debating, and I bear some responsibility for the way this debate was framed, but I'm going to argue that debating political correctnness, is this good or bad, is not the most productive way, and I think we need to take it out of a polarizing debate around this camp versus this camp, and try to address specific issues, and to the extent that we can, use evidence, to some extent values, use evidence to make decisions based on that. So that's kind of my point. So I don't know if that advances my cause particularly. I do want to spend my last minute here, though, and actually just address the elephant in the room, which is the two old white elephants in the room, or dinosaurs, or whatever you want to call us. What's that?
The four males.
Four males.
1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah.
And so, I don't presume to be an expert on this. I'm here because, our wonderful student, Ashley McTaggart, honor student from psychology, had this idea and said, this is an issue students are concerned about. They don't want to come and listen to another lecture. They do that every week. Debate would be an engaging way to do it. She knew that Wayne and I are always going at it on this type of stuff. And that's what convinced me to be here. But I hope that, again, I don't consider myself an expert on this, and I think we need other voices to continue with this. I know Diane doesn't want me to do this. I'm sorry. If Wayne has a poster of this event.
What?
You have a poster at your office of this event,
Yeah.
and there's a Post-it note next to it that says, because it's fun.
Yeah.
Right?
It's fun.
It's either for this one or the talk on craft dinner. I think it's for this one.
No, it's for this
That
one.
says, because it's fun. But it's an intellectual exercise for you. But there are people whose lives are impacted by the language we use, by the comments that are statements that are made in class, by the views that are presented. These affect people's lives, right? We're fortunate. They don't really affect our lives. We can get up here and we can have sort of an intellectual debate and enjoy that. But there are people whose lives are impacted every day by the very language we use, right? By the views that are expressed, by the types of ideas that are cropped. And so, there need to be others aside from, us two old white guys who are stepping up and continuing this debate or giving different voices, right? That's my whole point, that we're too used to voices like ours and not recognizing many others that are out there. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay. I am here because I believe that any academic that expresses any opinion in public, if challenged to debate that opinion in public, is obligated to do so. So I am constantly talking about things like political correctness, how it, I think, decreases our educational opportunities, how it devalues our education, and that sort of thing. Therefore, anytime I would be asked to debate this kind of thing in public, I would have to do it. I don't disagree that things need to be done on the basis of evidence, on the basis of scientific evidence, if you like, if you can get it. The problem is that most of these things are not evidential, okay? We don't have studies that are done on all the different words and all the different scenarios and all the different things. And Spinoza, if anybody's read him, any difference makes a difference. So if you want to say, here's something, unless again you've written the Chariot of Parmenides and have hobnobbed with the gods and know what is true and righteous and all this kind of stuff, you have to let it play out in a free and open marketplace of ideas. Sorry, I don't see there's any other way to do it. End game. Thank you.
Thank you to both debaters. We're near the end. I did want to make one personal comment, and it was from Arleigh's comments about Don Cherry. I was at Remembrance Day when Don Cherry was fired. I was an air cadet in my youth. I marched in every Remembrance Day parade. I was wearing my poppy. My son was there marching with the veterans. And at the Surrey Museum at the Cloverdale Cenotaph, where I was at, there was an exhibit on the British Indian Army's contributions to World War I. They had set the groundwork that allowed the Canadian Expeditionary Force, of whom Don Cherry's grandfather fought. Don Cherry's grandfather could have educated Don Cherry about how the British Indian Army helped him. And I was interviewed by Global Media that day what I thought about his firing. It had just been announced. And I said, I don't think he should be fired. He's had a huge impact on Canadian culture. He has a lot of followers, whether you agree with his outrageous comments or not, his outrageous suits or not. I said, turn it around, educate him, and have him speak to Canadians and say, he now knows better. than to think that all immigrants do not support the contributions of veterans, that all immigrants do not wear poppies. That was a teachable moment. Unfortunately, global media edited that part of my conversation, so it sounded like what I was saying was I just disagree with him, but they didn't say what I thought the remedy was. As an educator, I take offense when people say that we are preparing you for the real world, because this is the real world. This is all I've ever known. I have never not been in school. From kindergarten to high school to undergraduate, graduate, now 20 years at Malden. Am I still being prepared for the real world?
Yes,
so
because you've not been in
what
the world.
What has happened is that the real world has now come into the campus, into academy, and our students, pretty much every one of our students works. They are in the real world. There is it's back and forth, it's fluid, the walls have broken down. So do not think that these things are happening later, they're happening now. We can see by the diversity of our students and our comments that these are very real lived experiences, and the discrimination is happening now, and it's happened even before here, and it will continue. So the fight goes on, but in your fights, in your conversations, make them teachable moments, educate the other. Go and attend a group that you would never attend. Go speak to a person who looks different. When I, as an educator in the classroom, say, form learning partners, form a study buddy, go and seek someone who looks like someone you never would. And in that way, we can all, as a society, become more complicated about the concerns of each other. So I want to now ask you, dear audience, where you're feeling on this debate. You may still be unresolved, and that's okay. But with a show of hands, who still agrees, who still is in favor and support of that resolution that political correctness is now a threat to free speech on campus? With a show of hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so 7. So we started with 10 supporting the resolution. We've now dropped to Arleigh he teaches research methodology, so he would have pointed out that we've lost out some of the sample.
Mortality.
We should have a ratio, right? And who opposes it? 1, 2, 3, 4, which 5. So we went from 4 to 5. Who's still undecided? We were at 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's fewer indecision, so that might be a good thing. And who still has no idea what I'm talking about? Okay, that's great. So we're at the end. Congratulate yourselves for attending, for wrestling with these complicated ideas. There are no easy answers. And the last word is, again, going to go to Dr. Bernstein, who will tell you about next month's speaker.
So I want to thank everybody for coming out. This has been wonderful, and this is hosted by the Arts Speaker Series. The Faculty of Arts. Our next talk is on February 12th by Dr. Daniel Tones in the music department, and that will be in the Cedar Conference Center. And this is the first time we've had a debate, as I said in the introductory remarks, and I think we're going to do it again, especially in this space, because the more I was here and just watched people come in and listen while they were passing by, and even take a seat, eat at lunch, and listen. This is a really great environment in which to have an open debate, and I really appreciate your participation, especially the students not only coming out, but asking questions and being part of the debate and the discussion. So thanks again for coming out and supporting our speakers, and thanks for your time.